In a world where nearly 1 million people are subjected to famine-like conditions, our food systems are a pertinent topic of discussion. Our next speaker has traveled a long way to be with us, and we are honored to be in his royal presence. His Majesty King Letsie III. His Majesty is engaged in extensive academic study across a variety of disciplines, including law, developmental studies, and agricultural economics. In November 1990, His Majesty was sworn in as King Letsie III, after Letsie I, the eldest son of Morena Moshoeshoe, the founder of the Basotho nation. With reference to nutrition and investment in Africa, His Majesty noted that the tide has turned for the better, an accomplishment underpinned by the King's firm resolve to put nutrition and food security on the continental and global agenda. In addition to his rich academic expertise, His Majesty was appointed as the African Nutrition Champion by the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization, as well as the Champion of African Nutrition by the Assembly of African Heads of State. His Majesty was also appointed to be the World Bank's champion for its Human Capital Project. Lesotho is a kingdom whose economy places a considerable emphasis on agriculture, with over 70% of the population reliant on the industry for food and income, according to the World Bank. With his decades of experience in bringing global attention to the issue of nutrition and ensuring food security within the Kingdom of Lesotho, it is only fitting that His Majesty will elaborate on the economic impact of hunger and malnutrition, the case for the Kingdom of Lesotho. On that note, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to His Majesty King Letsie III.
Thank you. I'm just working. Right. I'm so grateful for that very warm introduction and very useful introduction, because it foregrounds the subject which I intend to talk to you about this evening, and it's made my job a whole lot simpler. In September 2015, all the members of the United Nations adopted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, including 17 Sustainable Development Goals. This agenda commits the international community to end poverty and hunger across the world in order to achieve sustainable development as measured through the economic, social, and environmental dimensions. While pockets of poverty and hunger are found in every setting, to date, the two ills are still more prevalent and severe in Africa in general, and the rural areas in particular. This reality demands that we commit greater focus on underserved rural communities, where agricultural and natural resources are the main source of livelihoods. The 2030 Agenda foregrounds hunger as an important cause as well as an effect of poverty. It acknowledges that the consequences of hunger go far beyond the terrible toll it has on those who suffer from it, but also has a profound economic cost for individuals, families, societies, and countries as a whole. Labor, which is often the only asset that the poor have at their disposal, is seriously devalued by hunger. On the one hand, it compromises the mental and physical health of the hungry, and on the other, it actively reduces their productivity and associated output. A quick glance at progress made towards achieving zero hunger for 2030 reveals a worrisome picture. The prevalence of hunger is on the rise, with Africa bearing the heaviest burden. 1 in 5 people in Africa were facing hunger in 2021, more than double the proportion of any other region of the world. Well before the COVID-19 pandemic, the world was already off track to ending world hunger and malnutrition in all its forms by 2030. Now the pandemic has exacerbated the crisis and has made this goal more challenging to achieve. Current projections suggest that 670 million will still be undernourished in 2030, dashing any hope of achieving zero hunger target by 2030. The situation is worsened by the war in Ukraine, which has multiple implications for global agricultural markets through the channels of trade, production, and prices. It casts a shadow over the state of food security and nutrition for many of our countries. Moreover, the world is also not on track to achieve targets for any of the nutrition indicators by 2030, notably evidenced by the current rates of progress on child stunting and wasting, exclusive breastfeeding, and low birth weight. While the effects of hunger and malnutrition are generally known, that knowledge has not always translated into appropriate policy actions. Investments in programs that help end hunger and malnutrition are not commensurate to the scale of the challenge. The design and implementation of programs for addressing the hunger and malnutrition challenge are grossly inadequate. Greater political commitment is therefore required to improve prospects of ending hunger and malnutrition in our lifetime. That is why forums of this nature provide an important platform for people like me for galvanizing future and present leaders towards developing fresh commitments and innovative solutions towards ending hunger and malnutrition. Recent research conducted in 21 African countries on the social and economic impact of child undernutrition provide facts and figures that should help emerging and current policy and decision makers appreciate the magnitude of the problem and move towards decisive action. The studies confirm that in all those 21 countries, Lesotho, my own country, included. Many households suffer from the consequences of poverty and inequalities that results in hunger and malnutrition. Hunger plays a key but often understated role in how these economies function. For example, school-going children fail to perform adequately at school due to hunger, which limits their prospects of relieving themselves and their families from the vicious cycle of poverty. Social protection programs such as school feeding programs and old age pension are good stopgap measures to address this key issue in vulnerable populations. However, these do not go far enough in addressing the root causes of hunger and malnutrition. These studies also confirm that extreme hunger and malnutrition remain major obstacles to development. Hunger and malnutrition reduce productivity of individuals by making them more susceptible to disease, which in turn compromise their ability to earn income and improve their livelihoods. Household hunger and malnutrition creates a vicious cycle of poverty that is hard to break, creating dependency on handouts from social safety nets. The cost of hunger and malnutrition on the national health systems is simply immeasurable. In short, hunger and malnutrition are responsible for more ill health than any other cause. While its effects along the entire lifespan are significant, there is no more a pivotal window in a lifetime in which hunger has more lasting effects than at birth and at early childhood. Maternal and child undernutrition contributes to more than 10% of the world's disease burden. Due to societal inequalities, children in rural settings and poorer households are more vulnerable to stunting compared to those in urban settings. More importantly, hunger has an intergenerational dimension, with undernourished mothers giving birth to underweight children who start life with a considerable disadvantage. According to Nobel Prize-winning economist James Heckman, there isn't a more effective instrument for breaking the intergenerational transmission of poverty than a significant investment in the early years of life. This most vulnerable period in the stages of human development represents the most impactful window to change the trajectory of individual lives as well as economies of our countries. With the remarkable potentialities of this window, it is a wonder why these early childhood well-being indicators haven't taken on the relevance and significance of economic indicators like the GDP and the Gini coefficient. Perhaps it is the innovative and holistic approach of this generation that can help the world measure what really counts. At the scale of a human single life, child hunger can have lifelong effects. In addition to the well-documented impact of food insecurity in the early years, several scholars contend that prenatal nutritional adversities, which change the metabolic system and increase the hazard of diseases, can hinder cognitive ability and educational outcomes. At the scale of nations, evidence has shown that early life experience of hunger lowers educational attainments and job quality, suggesting that early life nutritional deprivation has long-term effects on the country's human capital and labor market outcomes. A major economic impact of hunger as an early life experience is loss of human capital of the country. With the current and future prosperity of any country largely dependent on its human capital, it is inconceivable that a country can achieve inclusive economic growth on the strength of a hungry and cognitively retarded population. It therefore goes without saying that failure to deal with hunger and malnutrition makes it impossible for Africa and Lesotho to realize its 2030 vision of a prosperous continent based on inclusive growth and sustainable development. Leaving no one, especially no child, behind is the central and transformative promise of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Sustainable Development Goals. Adhering to this principle and ensuring that the furthest behind are reached will result in a well-nourished society that is able to reach its potential and gainfully contribute to the economic prosperity of our various countries. Ladies and gentlemen, in my country, Lesotho, the axiom prevention is better than cure has become abundantly proven in relation to the health system. For us, undernutrition and malnutrition have increased both public and private health care costs. The treatment of undernutrition and related illness is a critical recurrent cost to health systems. For example, the treatment of severely underweight children requires comprehensive protocol that is often costlier than the monetary value and effort needed to prevent undernutrition. The economic cost of each episode is often increased by the inefficiencies when such cases are treated without proper guidance from a healthcare professional or due to lack of access to proper health services. These costs generate a significant burden, not just on the public sector, but to households and society. For instance, the cost of hunger study conducted in Lesotho found that the total curative healthcare cost per annum was in the region of $4 million. These are resources that could have been used for initiatives that could facilitate the flourishing of our people, as well as contribute towards development projects which are critical for growing the economy and improving livelihoods. A deep dive into Lesotho's recent demographic health survey reveals that over 50,000 clinical episodes in Lesotho were associated with a higher risk of children being underweight, generating a total cost of $4.2 million or $4.2 million. Cases of diarrhea, fever, respiratory infections, and anemia totaled more than 7,000 episodes. Treatment of all these cases comes at an economic cost, which could be avoided if the country can win the fight against undernourishment, which is the root of most of these conditions that burden the health system. Other costs of hunger and malnutrition are more evident on the education system. The cost of hunger study in Lesotho estimates that up to $200 million are lost annually to the education system as a result of undernutrition, which was equivalent to 7% of the country's gross domestic product at the time of the study. The loss is made up of costs associated with repetition of classes, which is mostly due to stunting. The repetition rate for stunted children in 2014 was 14.1% compared to 5.8% for non-stunted children. The lower educational achievement of the stunted population has an impact on the quality of life as well as the expected level of income a person would earn as an adult. While it remains debatable the extent to which stunting can be reversed without deliberate, early and sustained intervention, in a context of poverty, it is almost never reversed. It is rather sad and sobering to acknowledge that it is estimated that almost half, about 45%, of the working age population in Lesotho today were stunted as children. This tragic forfeiture of human potential has grave personal, social, and economic costs. Therefore, we have to address it with greater urgency, the problem of hunger and malnutrition, especially at the critical stage of the first 1,000 days of human life, to enable our people to thrive and prosper. Sieving through the data from the 21 African countries that conducted the cost of hunger study, it is clear that these countries could collectively amass annual average savings of $6.1 billion and achieve 38% reduction in the cost associated with child undernutrition. These grim figures and pictures point to the urgent need for the country and the continent to take decisive actions in addressing malnutrition challenges, as they have profound impact on the economic prospects of our countries. As mentioned earlier, Lesotho and other African countries that are ravaged by the scourge of malnutrition stand to not only gain in savings if they succeed in their fight against undernutrition, but also unlock the human potential, creativity, and agency of hundreds of millions of people. Many of these countries are far off the mark in achieving the African Union target of reducing stunting to 10% by 2025. To accelerate progress on this front, respective countries will have to invest more on nutrition and food security programs. And international actors will need to partner and invest significantly in breaking the cycles of hunger and poverty, as their impacts does not end on the national scale. If the recent pandemic has taught us anything, it is that our shared challenges are borderless and unbounded. In short, stunting and malnutrition in poor countries ought to matter to all, both in the loss of the unique gift that each life offers, as well as the cumulative costs of hunger. Such efforts should include repurposing the existing programs to be more deliberate in addressing the impact of droughts in poor countries, provide support in improving agricultural yields, ensuring the availability of nutritious food in the first 1,000 days, and increasing access to and affordability of healthy diets. Ladies and gentlemen, in Lesotho, the need to achieve zero hunger and put the country on a path to prosperity can never be overemphasized. To help us generate the required momentum for this mammoth task, it is always important to draw inspiration from recent successes. Over the last 10 years, Lesotho has seen a 7% reduction in stunting rates, with the latest figure standing at 32.1%, down from 39%. While this rate is still unacceptably high, the observed reduction in stunting rates does show that there are things that the country has done right. Key initiatives that contributed to the observed reduction in stunting include 1, increased spending in social protection, which improved access to food and income for the most vulnerable segments of the population. 2, design and implementation of projects with strong nutrition components. And 3, sustained awareness and training on nutrition. Now, while these initiatives were instrumental in reducing stunting and other forms of malnutrition, it is my firm belief that they could have made a much bigger impact if there was a strong coordination and complementarity between programs and associated role players. To sustain these gains and help fast-track progress towards achieving national goals, Lesotho will have to build on these impactful initiatives, strengthen synergies, and ensure that most efforts and investments are channeled to them. The fight against hunger and malnutrition needs to appreciate the rural face of poverty and facilitate investment in programs or initiatives that have the highest potential for eradicating rural poverty. Growth in agricultural sector is known to have one of the greatest impacts in reducing rural poverty. This is essentially because most of the extreme poor depend on agriculture and related activities for a significant part of their livelihoods. Such growth becomes most effective in reducing extreme poverty and hunger when it involves smallholder farmers, particularly women. It is therefore critical that major investments are channeled to this sector to stimulate inclusive economic growth. In the past, programs and initiatives in this sector focused on improving production and productivity, with limited attention to the other nodes or spokes of the food system wheel. This approach had limited success. It has contributed to global and national food systems that have left too many people behind. It is therefore critical that the current and future focus should be on transforming food systems to be more productive, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable, while addressing major drivers of food insecurity and malnutrition. In closing, since we are off track globally in achieving the zero hunger goal for 2030, we need to urgently reverse the negative trend on hunger if we are to manage the economic cost associated with malnutrition. While everybody has a role to play in addressing the drivers of food insecurity and malnutrition, I would like to single out key actors that have to carry the biggest weight in helping us realize zero hunger in our lifetime. Firstly, I exhort political and government leaders to transform their perspective to the crisis of hunger and adopt a whole-of-life approach to human development, with a specific focus on birth and the early years, as these have exponential implications for national economies. Secondly, I urge leaders to be more inclusive, transparent, responsive, and accountable for improving access to healthy diets and making those healthy diets more affordable. To the captains of industry and the broader private sector leaders that are beneficiaries of the food system, you are called upon to make a deliberate effort to promote greater inclusion. Such inclusion will increase the voice and participation of smallholder farmers and other marginalized groups in the decision-making process within the larger food system. For a long time, smallholder farmers and other marginalized groups have neither participated nor benefited from the growth process generated within the current food system. We all need to appreciate that smallholder farmers produce more than a third of the world's food. Many of them suffer poverty and food insecurity. They are often excluded from the decision-making process and have limited access to finance and innovative technologies. We should therefore make it our duty to support inclusive agri-food value chains by, amongst other things, even shopping at farmers' markets. To academia and research institutions, your role as knowledge generators and brokers is well appreciated. I urge you to increase your research and innovation output with the sole objective of helping us build more inclusive, resilient, and efficient agri-food systems that can withstand the challenges of today and the challenges of tomorrow. My final message to all of us sitting in this forum is that hunger has destructive ripple effects on the economic, educational, social, and political trajectories of nations. It requires urgent and fervent attention. And we therefore await fresh insights of young leaders who see the world as integrated and value the vulnerable. So to you, I say, your time is now. The world awaits your solutions. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.
I humbly thank you, King Letsie and your royal delegation, for gracing our summit. It was insightful to learn more about the pressing issue of world hunger, gain a holistic overview of the Kingdom of Lesotho, and a particular point which His Majesty emphasized during his speech, to transform our existing food systems. I'm sure that everyone was equally fascinated by His Majesty's speech and have interesting questions lined up. So let's get into the Q&A session with questions from the in-person audience. Yes, please. Before you start speaking, could we get a mic here to the lady at the front? A kind request for everyone to first wait for the mics to reach you before you begin speaking so we can all hear your thoughts.
Good afternoon, Excellency. It's a great honor to be here in your presence. My name is Yesol, South Korean, but studying in Mexico City. I have read some papers about the importance of purchasing parity power of mothers to reduce malnutrition. So when it comes to that, what do you think about the female role in the eradication of hunger and malnutrition, generally in your kingdom?
Certainly, I believe that the role of the women, particularly in Lesotho and think across Africa as a whole, in reducing malnutrition, reducing hunger and poverty is crucial. Because the women in all the households across the continent, in my country in particular, are the ones who are at the forefront of producing the food and of producing the food for the children at home and for the households in general. So empowering women with the ability to produce, empowering women with the ability to purchase nutritious food would go a very long way in reducing malnutrition in all its forms. So I think it is right that we should focus on women. And I must add, as I said, one of the major strategy of fighting malnutrition is to fight it in the first 1,000 days. And that means from the day that the baby is being carried in the womb, So women are also, that means women are absolutely important. They have to be well nourished while they carry the baby. And of course, once the baby is born, have that ability to look after the baby and feed the baby through the breastfeeding and other things, but also through other ways, so that that baby grows up healthy and well nourished. So women are absolutely crucial.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your answer. Do we have another question on the floor?
Thank you so much, Your Majesty, for the thoughts that you shared. I completely agree with all of them. And I just wanted to ask for your thoughts on how, while also ensuring that food security within Africa is established and secure, ensuring that it doesn't become another case of Africa becoming dependent on in ensuring its food security.
Well, you know, it's as I said, a lot of things. It's about political leadership. We, as leaders, we have to have the right commitments, make the proper political commitments to make sure that we have the enabling legislation in our countries, enabling policies to make sure that the arable land that is available in our country is used to the optimum. In a lot of our countries, unfortunately, we are not using the resources that God has given. We're not using them optimally, land and even water. So if we can harness all of that within the continent, Africa, I have no doubt, can produce an abundance of food without depending on food aid from anywhere across the world. So we just have to get our act together, use what we have the proper policy framework, proper legislative framework in place in our various countries, and also open up, you know, among African countries with make trade easier among ourselves. So that is also another component that we should also look at. But we are easily, very, very easily capable of producing our own food and be, as a continent, to be very food secure.
I believe we do have time for one last question. Yes, the person on the right-hand side.
Thank you, Your Majesty. My name is Priyam, and I'm from the University of Manchester. And I have a follow-up question from the last question. What is the role that should be played by the so-called developed countries in helping their peers reverse the negative trends of hunger?
So far, we do have some very good initiatives. I can't blame, for example, I work with the UN system through the Food and Agricultural Organization. There are some very good initiatives coming from the UN system and from other agencies to help us reverse that trend that I've just been talking about. But I still believe it's a temporary. It's not a permanent. It's a short-sighted thing. We have to, as Africans ourselves, as I said in answering the earlier question, we have enough within our country to produce food for ourselves without having to depend on the generosity or the largesse or the assistance of the UN system or other countries. So, but I'm hoping that somewhere sooner rather than later, we will have to find a way. And another disruption of our goal of reaching nutrition and food security is these conflicts that emerge in the continent that cause displacement, huge displacement of people, and so on and so forth. But nonetheless, we just have to get, as I said, get our act together and use the resources we have effectively and more optimally.
Right. Yeah, I hope that does answer your question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Majesty, for elaborating that last answer so comprehensively. And I would like to thank you, as well as your delegation, as well as the audience in general,
Thank you.
for such an engaging Q&A session. That was absolutely riveting.
Thank you.
Yes, yes, indeed.